I like to move it, move it. 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 I like to move it, move it.
The opinions or theories that arise within this video do not necessarily reflect my personal beliefs in this case. However, if we are going to remain objective, we do have to see this case from every angle, and that includes the reasonable doubts that have kept Kessinger quiet and currently uncharged. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I hope you enjoy the content and decide to like and subscribe. Let's get started. I wanted to begin by reflecting on a comment that was left under a previous post regarding how many times I've put off publishing this video. I genuinely appreciate the openness with you all and wanted to remain transparent. While nothing ominous was holding me back from releasing this particular video, it's my opinion that if, in fact, Kessinger had anything to do with the murders, and there is, in fact, a case being built against her, I would absolutely hate for any of this content to be used in such a way that could jeopardize the case. Additionally, if she's completely innocent, I also wouldn't want to falsely report any findings or anything of that nature. So I have definitely made sure to look back on the discovery and research to make sure that this is a more factual as opposed to opinionated piece. I've also taken time to pause before publishing with each video because I want to A, make sure I'm producing quality content, and B, that I remain true to my channel's mission. Additionally, I recently accepted a position as a high school cross-country coach and had to adjust my schedule quite a bit very quickly. That has led to a few postponements, but nonetheless, here it is. Now let's discuss the topic of reasonable doubts. What is reasonable doubt according to Colorado's law? As found on Colorado's courts.state.co.us, the link will be down in the description, page 204 of the 3,777 page states, every person charged with a crime is presumed innocent. The presumption of innocence remains with the defendant throughout the trial and should be given effect by you unless, after considering all of the evidence, you are then convinced that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden of proof is upon the prosecution to prove to the satisfaction of the jury beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of all the elements necessary to constitute the crime charged. Reasonable doubt means a doubt based upon reason and common sense, which arises from a fair and rational consideration of all the evidence, or the lack of evidence in this case. It is a doubt which is not a vague, speculative, or imaginary doubt, but such a doubt as would cause reasonable people to hesitate to act in matters of importance to themselves. If you find from the evidence that each and every element of a crime has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant guilty of that crime. If you find from the evidence that the prosecution has failed to prove any one or more of the elements of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant not guilty of that crime. It kind of makes you think twice about what would have happened had Chris just kept his mouth shut, doesn't it? What are your thoughts? Drop below in the comments your thoughts on, did the police have a case without the false confessions? Do you think he would be a free man had this gone to trial? Why or why not? Before we jump into the specifics regarding the Watts case, I wanted to share one article I stumbled upon while putting together this video. I found it extremely interesting and fitting, to say the least, especially since we are discussing reasonable doubt and why Kessinger was never charged. Maintaining the integrity of the judicial system is imperative to true justice being served. This article discusses just how important this process is in the Supreme Court's ruling over unacceptable use of analogies when the jury is being instructed. Something so seemingly small has now overturned convictions for many in the state of Colorado. Imagine what would have happened should the DA not be able to plead out a case without corroborating evidence. The article is posted in the description below. However, what stood out to me was the Colorado Supreme Court has determined that trial court judges who attempt to define the concept of reasonable doubt using illustrations or analogies to familiar concepts may in fact be committing an error that requires reversal of a defendant's conviction. That's per coloradopolitics.com. I recommend pausing the video and read the article, or click the link in the description and read it in its entirety. Given the case that caused the reversal took place in 2019, it was an interesting read. In this video, we will discuss a few seemingly strong theories or evidence, and I will explain how or why I could see a DA not pressing charges too soon, or if at all. Let me be clear, each one of these deserves its very own video. There is so much intertwined with each topic that it truly could lead you down about 20 rabbit holes, totally backed with evidence, and yet it still leaves us with questions. Take just a few moments and read through the rest of the case study. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I just want to add in that we really have to pay attention to the wording that is used, especially in jury instructions, when it says things such as all that is provided. It was explained to me that what it truly means is that you will be given a piece of evidence and you will have to determine if it's believable or if it's not. If it's believable, you keep it. If it's not, you throw it out. Is it reasonable? And I think as we discuss the next topic, you will be able to objectively take yourself out of this case, look at it from a different perspective, and then potentially see why the DA has not moved forward. There is a lot of data that points to her being there at the house the morning Shanann and the kids went missing. However, if we think back to Hidden Motives Part 2, where we discuss the stalker and what happens when you have to cut one off, this, in my opinion, is one very reasonable argument that could be made by a defense attorney. If you missed that video, don't hesitate. Go back on the channel, find it. It definitely is a very interesting discussion, and we definitely provided statistics and backed up our discussion with the panel, CDT, and ATS News. Given the childishness of the then 30-year-old Kessinger in the interviews, her choices immediately following the disappearances, the lies, and the list goes on and on. It could be very well argued that she was emotionally immature and decided to quote-unquote stop by the residence to verify that his wife did in fact return home. Remember, Shanann's flight was delayed. That 111-minute phone call with Kessinger very well could have been regarding Shanann's flight delay and whether or not he was being honest with Kessinger at this point. Maybe this was a moment similar to Watts describing as talking her off a ledge. Remember that day? She showed up. It is proven, and would certainly be noted, or worth noting, that Chris was less than an honest man. In my opinion, while I believed it is no coincidence she showed up that morning, this is also not proof beyond a reasonable doubt that a jury would be able to fulfill its obligation to convict her should she be charged with murder. At least not with what we have been given with the discovery in the interviews. This, in my opinion, is why we have not heard from her at all. She knows that once she opens her mouth, she is breaking her silence, and that has kept her free all this time. I believe the Petito's civil case was only successful due to the fact that while the Laundrie family exercised their right to remain silent, once their attorney spoke for them, it was deemed they opened themselves up for that civil battle. They lost that case merely because they allowed their attorney to speak for them that ultimately presented them as guilty of intentional infliction of emotional distress. The information presented in a civil trial does not have to prove reasonable doubt, rather intent. I'm not an attorney and highly suggest checking out Scott Reich's channel. He is a practicing Colorado defense attorney and shares his own opinions on the case. The DA would have to put Kessinger inside the house that specific morning. He would need a specific date and time of death range for Shanann and Ring doorbell footage from that morning prior to Chris starting up his truck, or a defense attorney would have a field day with this potentially being a means of dismantling their case at trial completely. Again, this one scenario could be a video all on its own, but that's not the purpose of this video, so let's keep going. Reasonable doubt. Number 2. The real affair timeline could significantly impact the motive one or two ways. Given the accounts found in discovery from a coworker seeing them together around March or April, the condom expiration date searches from Kessinger in March or April, the date of conception is around March or April, the date Shanann spoke with the attorney over lunch about Colorado family law and divorce was in March or April, would all indicate that this affair started before 2018. Again, this could and will be a video on its own. However, the point to be made for this one is that the narrative could fit better if the affair actually began, in my opinion, initially when Chris first moved to Colorado without Shanann. Prior to Shanann and him getting married, maybe at this point it was strictly emotional. It's questionable to me, but if in fact it was even an emotional affair and it was broken off when he chose Shanann over his family's wishes, fast forward to July of 2017, Chris mentions introducing Kessinger to Shanann in his prison interview, but it couldn't have been 2018 because she was in North Carolina. So if it were 2017, then that blows the credibility of Kessinger's account of only meeting him once she started at Anadarko in March or April of 2018. This all builds up to A. Kessinger was the one that got away from Chris. After years of marriage to Shanann and attempting to quote-unquote fix the marriage with kids, he realized that he wanted to be with Kessinger during the uninterrupted time he spent with her over the summer. While there are several reasons I do not believe this narrative, it would give more credibility to a defense for Kessinger. This brings up B. Was Kessinger pregnant with Watts' baby? In the interview, she mentions feeling sick. Her dad mentions she's been sick. The affair picks up steam and becomes a bit rocky over the summer. He mentions the sand dune trip being one that was life-changing. Take the date of the sand dunes trip in the week of the murders, and that puts her at approximately 4 to 5 weeks pregnant. That's far enough along to test on a urine pregnancy test at home and experience morning sickness, hence her not, quote-unquote, feeling well. Arguably, it could have just been the stress of the case, but sigh. We will leave that one there for the time being. Or, let's discuss C. Kessinger and Watts had a longer relationship than led on, and she moved to Anadarko to be closer to Watts. It was her taking the next step. Emotionally, the affair was already full force, had been put on pause, and then now it was back on. But once it became physical, then the more permanent changes were made. When Shanann found out she was pregnant with Nico, that changed things, especially if B was true. Remember, there were 2 different types of tests seen compared between the trash can and the announcement video. Did Shanann randomly take another test after she returned from North Carolina? That was a fresh trash bag, and not very full. So this could mean with 2 babies on the way, Chris felt extremely trapped and snapped, or Kessinger believed Watts was staying with his wife, which evidence supports, and she showed up that morning to confront Shanann. Again, even with both of these, it's not enough evidence to, in my opinion, charge Kessinger. It does, however, strengthen the idea of the motive. 2 pregnancies would be a much stronger motive than a 6-week affair, in my opinion. Reasonable doubt, number 3. The ongoing family drama. Another doubt that could be cast was the Watts family knew about the affair between Kessinger and Chris. It's possible they knew about it when it started as talking. And Cindy mentions this that she suspected it was an emotional affair in an interview she did early on. Then we have to take into account they knew Chris Watts' concerns about paternity. Watts questioning paternity is a sure way to tick off a pregnant wife, but it makes sense if he was hoping to move on with Kessinger and only have the girls. Making her mad and writing the letter he left at his parents adds up with his theory, or this theory, I should say. If he felt attempting to leave her would result in a tragic response, his parents being open to a new woman that wouldn't force their son to write them off for months at a time just because they didn't support or agree with her, was a future worth potentially breaking up his marriage and family for. His parents constantly questioned Shanann's financial worth, yet they visibly supported the Thrive business. Reasonable doubt 3B. Shanann's family feeds into the theory and question of Nico's paternity. I say this respectfully because I really don't think that they had the intention of appearing dishonest. However, they did go on Dr. Phil's show and state that they had, in fact, the DNA results, and they stated that the baby was Chris's. It really didn't settle any of the debates, given the one person it's alleged Shanann may have had an intimate link with was also named Chris. Her own text messages make it questionable, along with several of her videos and the timeline of the infidelity, the struggles within the marriage, the timeline of when potentially Kessinger and Watts really amped back up. All of those things come into play around the same time. They acted as if they didn't realize that their debt was so bad. However, it can be heard here in this video, Shanann having a conversation with her mother, and you can hear her in her own voice say that she can't purchase their products like she did the previous month, or she would. Is it possible both sets of parents suspected the downward spiral and simply just had no way of gauging how bad it was about to get? While I'm sure finances played a role in Chris not being able to afford a double life, I do not believe it was the motive in this case.
If I could afford to buy it out of pocket again like I did last month for you, I would, but I can't. Want me to read to you? What if the...
We will discuss that further in part 4. We will definitely come back to these theories later on in more detail, but do you see how each theory leaves behind its own reasonable doubt? See how they can keep going on, or how it could take years to build a solid case against someone? It really begs the question. Do you think the ability to have technology, video footage, helps our system or hurts law enforcement? Who does the unidentified fingerprint belong to that was found on the garbage bag at Survey? Who was the she Chris referred to when he says she wasn't supposed to be there? I don't want to protect her. Where is the actual document of paternity results for Nico? It's not like they would be graphic or anything, and I understand protecting Shanann's right to privacy. However, now in death, it's one of those questions that arises that would very quickly be silenced if in fact the documents were produced. Again, I don't believe her family owes the public necessarily anything, because we clearly have only been given a very highly redacted discovery and bits and pieces of the truth. So there's so many questions in this case that it is extremely sensitive to talk about some of these topics, but it is warranted because, again, the motive and the narrative that's been given simply doesn't fit. It would just be nice to say Chris Watts is or is not the father. It would solidify a potential motive rather than taunt the public with an unanswered question that could be easily resolved. What was Chris and Shanann's relationship like while they were planning their wedding? For the sake of this comment section, I will not even touch on the angle of blaming Shanann, but it is a theory that would be blasted to raise reasonable doubt. Don't think for a second if this had gone to trial that Shanann's character would not have been put on display and questioned. At what point do all the puzzle pieces come together and are fit to convict? Or is this an approach to justice that is no longer a reliable tactic at trial? Think about it before you respond. Scott Peterson was tried and convicted on a lot less evidence, and now his verdict is at risk of being overturned. What are some reasonable doubts per the Colorado law that would support Kessinger from being charged for her involvement in these crimes? What would be something to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she is in fact innocent? Chris Watts' confession cannot be proven. Per the discovery, it does not match the autopsy findings. In closing, should Kessinger ever wish to give an interview with an objective channel, I would be more than honored to feature her side of the story. Until then, I leave you with a sweet memory of Miss Bella.
Listen to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic of which stands one nation under God and indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Good job.